I'm glad to be here. Thank you for asking me, Gene, and David, thanks for joining, making this a much more interesting environment. And thank you all for coming. I look forward to your feedback and questions at the end here. Let's revisit what our proposition is. The stagnation of living standards and soaring economic inequality are the defining trends. Two statements of fact. So let's work our way through those. This is the income distribution as published by the United States Census Bureau of households, organized by quintiles or fifths of the population. And as you can see, it runs from roughly 15,000 to a little over 200,000. And that is the differences in income as the Census Bureau defines it. And that difference is 16.7 times bigger at the top than it is at the bottom. Now that has two components: earned income from working and from savings, and transfer income, which is money the government gives to people, not in exchange for any work. Now, the earned income that census does also is missing some pieces that I want to talk about first, because we engaged, two colleagues and I engaged in the activity that resulted in a book. And we fixed these numbers because census doesn't count the capital gains, which are prominent at the top end of the income distribution. It does not count employer-paid benefits, which affect everybody, and it does not count certain other low and underreported items in the low income. So when we fix those, actually the distribution looks bigger, looks worse. But then there's the transfer payments. Census says there's this much, but they miss 2/3 of it. What do they miss? They miss food stamps. They miss refundable tax credits. They miss the federal government paying for the health care of lower income people. When we add all of those in, it looks like this, which is then a difference of 5 to 1, okay, 5.7 to 1. So we've eliminated 2/3 of the inequality simply by counting all the income. But we also need to look at how much taxes are taken away. So here in the red is what the taxes take away. Taxes take away 35% of the income of the upper earners. It takes away 7.5% of those at the lower end, and that dashed line is the income after transfers and taxes. And you can see that the difference between top and bottom got a whole lot smaller when we count everything, only 4 to 1. In other words, what we believe, what we are told day after day by the politicians and by the official announcements from government is that our income is very unequal. In fact, it's not all that unequal. 4 to 1 doesn't sound so bad. But in any case, we should talk about the 4 to 1, not the 16 to 1, whether you think it's bad or not. But there's another element to this as well. As look at the bottom 3 quintiles, the 60% at the lowest end of the income scale, all essentially have the same level of income. Now I'm going to put this on a different chart just so you can see it a little more easily. So that's each quintiles or each fifth's income. And as you can see, the income for the bottom 3, they're each quite close. But that's not the end of the story. People who analyze these data usually make a size adjustment for the size of the household. Lower income households tend to have 1.5 people per household. The upper end tends to have 3.5. When you make that adjustment, the difference is only 2.7 to 1. So there's not a huge difference in the welfare of our households based on their economic performance. And what's important here to note as well is that how they get to that point is different. Adults of prime work age in the bottom quintile today, 2/3 of them do not work. And I don't mean they don't work some days, they don't work any time at all during a year, 2/3. And look at what they get for their income. Adjusted for size, lower income, the bottom quintile, actually has 5% more income than the second quintile. And the third quintile has only 7% more than the bottom. And not only is this income not different, the way they got there is very different. As I said, the bottom quintile, 2/3 of the people don't work. But in the second and third quintiles, almost all of the prime work age adults work. And there are 2 to 3 times as many adults work in those quintiles than in the bottom. And they work 2 times more hours per week. So what's happening here is the bottom 60% of the population has essentially the same income, but it's because government has taken the taxes from the upper end and redistributed it to the lower end. And that has created the fact that we now have 2/3 of our prime work age adults not working in the lower quintile because they accepted the government's offer not to work. Now there's another way to measure this, and it's called the Gini index. Now Gini is not some critter in a bottle that gives us our wishes. This is a guy's name. And it's a measure which says at 0, we have perfect equality. All households have the same income. At 1, perfect inequality. All the incomes in one household. And this has been around for years, and there are other measures that are similar, but they tell the same thing. And Census has published it, and here we see it drifting up over the last 70 years. And people believe that this is true. But what do we know about it? This 23% increase in inequality as measured by Census isn't counting the transfer payments. It isn't adjusted for the taxes. If we do that, lo and behold, not only does it not climb, it actually has drifted down slightly. And that's a fact. Now let's take a look at that one of the charts that was in David's book. I took the data from it on the left-hand side, and it shows the percent changes over since 1960 in the 10th, the 25th, the 50th, and the 90th percentiles. And that tells the story that he was talking about. But the data came from Gabriel Zuckman, and I know that data well. They don't count most of the transfer payments. And if you count all the transfer payments and adjust for the taxes, you get the distribution now over on the right-hand side, okay? And we see that it's the bottom that has grown the fastest. Now, why is that? It's because transfer payments, money the government gives to people, has grown since 1967 by 900%. In other words, people were giving away 10 times as many dollars to the lower income groups, and the result is fewer of them work. And so that is one of the reasons why we have all this negative effects. People are dropping out of the labor force and living on government transfer payments, and so we get some of those adverse social effects. Okay. Now this is average hourly earnings, which is one of the series that David referred to but didn't actually show. And it shows what it looks like might be stagnation. And this is adjusted for inflation. But it's not the whole story. First of all, it doesn't count the 1/4 of the compensation people get from their employer that's not wages and salaries, healthcare benefits and so on. Secondly, it doesn't include the self-employed and the entrepreneurs, the people that create something out of nothing. Those people aren't included here. And most important, it doesn't adjust using the best available price index. It uses a CPIU, and now there's a better index that the BLS has published for the last 22 years, that if you use that for the adjustment, we would see that instead of a 20% rise, we would have like a 50% rise. So that is a statistical problem that we need to fix. And it is fixed. It exists. The data exists, but it just gets ignored. But beyond that, there's still more improvements that need to be made to the CPI. And I kind of have a personal knowledge of this. I used to run the program, so I know where the skeletons are. But if we adjust for other things that need to be fixed in the CPI, we would get an increase of more than 100% since 1964. And this isn't just some hypothetical, mythological problem. This actually comes out of 3 different government blue ribbon panels: the Stigler panel, the Boskin, and the Bowles, not to mention Alan Greenspan when he was at the Fed. Because using the right index makes a whole lot of difference. But now let's turn to the series that's actually probably most important for us right now. And that is, this is now median household income. Okay, this is really the measure of economic welfare. And originally, census was using the basic CPIU, and that dashed black line, the dashed black line at the bottom there, is what it would look like with adjusted for that. But then they moved on to a better index that BLS produced but didn't publish regularly. And finally, they moved to using the change CPI, which is the one I showed you in the previous slide. And in this case, we see again, once again, we get a substantially greater increase when we count the price changes right. What happens is the old indexes that they're using do not count the price changes right. And if we make the fixes, it again gets us up over 100%. So we are deceiving ourselves by using these deficient indexes. Now, the key here is the better index is used in 2 places. One is right here, census is using it, and the other is in the adjustment of the tax brackets. Otherwise, people just completely ignore it. I want to talk just briefly about this one here. This is one that David had. And yes, this is how much people think things are going the right way. And it looks pretty flat since, you know, about 29 there. First of all, this measure is not what we're debating. We're debating people's attitudes. I mean, that's what we're talking about when we're looking at this. But the proposition is income inequality has soared and has stagnated, and income or prosperity has stagnated. This is people's attitude. And people's attitudes are important, but they're not the same facts as the actual financial data show. So we've had 3 lows in this. One was back in 1979 and 1980. Well, in other words, it was at a low back at the point where David was pointing things have gotten worse since. But then it proceeded to peak in 1986, which is what? Right in the middle of the Reagan administration, the second administration of Reagan. It peaked again at the end of Clinton's administration, and it peaked again in the first administration of George Bush. Those were the highs, and it then declined since. But we're talking about long-term trends here. It goes up, it goes down, and you'll notice there, coming out of the financial crisis, very slow improvement until we hit the Trump days. Get boosted up, and then we hit COVID, and of course, it went to hell. But the point is, this is not a real economic measure, but it moves with the real economic measures in many ways. So what we got to remember here is we're talking about how unequal is income and has it stagnated? And the answer is, if we use the right data, if we count all the transfer payments, if we adjust for taxes, there is no serious stagnation. And the inequality, if anything, has gotten less. Those are facts. And we, in a book that I wrote with some of my colleagues, we go through pulling the data out and assembling it and putting in the missing transfer payments, subtracting the taxes. These are data that actually exist in government statistical bases, but they're not used for calculating the income. So that's what's important. Remember what we're looking at here is did economic conditions stagnate and did economic conditions become more unequal? Well, the answer to both of those is no, it doesn't. Okay, let's look at life expectancy. Somehow I knew David was going to talk about this one. So this is the chart from his book, and it's true. It's distressing, but there's another explanation on which I've written another 200-page book, and it looks like this. Okay, here I've moved it up into the upper right-hand corner there, and I'm drawing a red line along it so we can keep it highlighted. Now I've seen this before because I've written about it before. What's missing? History. Come on. There we go. Pre-1960, roughly. Look at what happens. All of a sudden, it's slowed down. Look at the trend. The trend before 1960 is the dashed black line. After 1960, it's the green line. It takes a right turn. Why? Government got in the way. And it was triggered by Sputnik. In 1957, the United States started spending like a drunken sailor on science. It quadrupled the spending of NIH. The consequence of that was NIH began to drive out private research. And it crowded it away both in terms of hiring away people to do the work and doing the work that had the most interesting effects. And as a result, people couldn't do it. And often violating scientific principles. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hit that. And that's what drove the rate of improvement down, because all of a sudden our scientific research was not focused on solving problems, but on hiring scientists.